Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V the Guerrilla Economist. V the Guerrilla Economist, and welcome to Rogue News. It's V for Veles here as well. Veles, good morning, buddy. How are you?
I'm just fine, sir. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, man. I can't complain. I mean, I could complain, but no one's going to listen. Lots of things going on, my friend. Where do you want to begin?
Yeah, so much indeed going on. So it is a Thursday, folks. A little different time for me, but we adapt and overcome here at Rogue. Had some stuff pop up that required me to move the show again. And just a housekeeping item, no program for me next week because I will be traveling. And for those of you for whom my traveling is a cause of concern, uh, you may want to take the appropriate steps. But very glad to have you all here with us today on Thursday. And as V said, there's a great deal going on in the world right now. So let's get into it. So the first thing is definitely speaking on behalf of everybody here at Rogue News. Our prayers for the folks hit by Hurricane Helene previously and now Hurricane Milton. Equally for the first responders, the utilities personnel, including out-of-state personnel that are helping both in Florida and in other states, emergency managers and medical professionals of all kinds, because many of them have not been able to stand down for more than a week, depending on where they are geographically. And at this point, they're running on coffee and Tylenol. At this point, I've been there in similar but related situations myself, where it's like the old joke about distance runners hitting their pace or whatever. Yes, that's true. But after having worked with FEMA during Hurricane Katrina back in '05 or the effects of it afterward, 72 hours is pretty much the rule of thumb, whether it's military personnel in the field or what have you. You can run folks for about 72 hours, but then you got to bring in others, because no matter how much amphetamines you give them, it's not enough. So on that related topic, first item for today, current state. We continue to operate, my friends, with either a lack of information or disinformation on key recent events, and noting all of the attention that has been paid to North Carolina, and with good reason. At the same time, when it came to Hurricane Helene, let's not forget that 61 out of 67 counties in Florida were declared disaster areas. And that's before the events of the past 48 hours or so. Now, good thing Florida has that budget surplus, as I don't think there will be much available from the feds. At the same time, many are pointing to the billions that have been given to Ukraine versus what they believe they're seeing spent in North Carolina and other impacted states. That is true. But when it comes to specific federal agencies, and I know some of you may raise an eyebrow at this, let's not beat up on FEMA too much. That's not to forgive FEMA, but FEMA can only do what they're allowed to do, and that's part of the challenge, and I'm going to get into this a little bit. So first of all, just a little bit of history. Please remember that when Homeland Security was first stood up, I was a consultant that was brought in with a small firm of retired executives to help the agency stand up, and most importantly, try and get the 32 mouths that needed to be fed to work well together in an environment like Washington, D.C., where nobody wants to work well together. And by the standards of U.S. government agencies, DHS continues to be a mess, and it continues to get worse. At the same time, we got to deal with facts before we let ourselves get too dissuaded by what's going on social media or even statements on Twitter. So the first item is, contrary to what you may have heard or believe, FEMA is one player among many on the ground in any disaster, both from the government and from individual states. And equally, depending on the state where the disaster occurred, state agencies tend to have the leadership role rather than FEMA. FEMA or federal agencies are usually just sitting at the table with everybody else. Also, FEMA's primary mission is education, as well as how to plan for disasters, certifications, as well as financial programs or resources they provide folks to help them get by until either their state or frankly, their home insurance company can take it from there and provide them what they need. Yes, I saw the thing in the news about electric chainsaws being handed out in North Carolina where the power's out. At the same time, that occurred because federal agencies have to adhere to this nonsense rules about no gasoline powered anything. Back during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when it hit in Louisiana, one of the things FEMA did was they did provide people, depending on their need, they provided people electric generators powered by gasoline. They will no longer do that because of these new rules with the government about everything must be low carbon and this, that, and the other. We have to remember on a prior show, I brought up the point that federal employees across a number of agencies recently got in trouble because while traveling on government business, they didn't use Ubers or taxis who were electric. That's no joke. At the same time, the other thing they got hit for was, depending on your agency, but not really. I mean, it's pretty much all the agencies. You're not supposed to, if you're renting a vehicle, it is supposed to be electric. You can't rent a vehicle that runs on gasoline. Also, again, not a joke. So this is part of the problem why equipment is being sent to areas in need of aid that is completely inappropriate for what's needed there, because they're looking at a clipboard saying the only thing I can send you is an electric chainsaw. One of the many projects I worked on with FEMA after Katrina, when they were trying to get their arms around, loosely said, what went wrong, is what's known as surge management. And this is commercial organizations do this too, especially in the insurance industry. Is how do you ramp up beyond your organization's ability to handle a situation, even what you would normally consider extreme? Please see my comment about you've got to operate for more than 72 hours, keeping the lights on. And the things that were used in the commercial space by the insurance industry were certainly eye-opening and appreciated by the folks inside Homeland Security and FEMA when we explained to them how the insurance industry responded to, say, flooding or an earthquake on the West Coast or what have you. But at the same time, they were very limited in how much of that they could leverage. And of course, don't get me started on the American Red Cross, because it's funny that the media doesn't even bring up anything about the Red Cross anymore, with good reason. Because essentially they don't do crap anymore. They're nothing but a blood plasma business, and the accusations of corruption against that organization I will not delve into here. The dollar figures being thrown around in the media of what FEMA is offering have some backstory that needs to be understood. FEMA has always had financial tiers or levels for what financial aid they can offer depending on a disaster. Those are preset amounts of money or aid that has been the case ever since Hurricane Katrina in 2005 or even before. So FEMA can only do what they're legally allowed to do as an agency. And the other thing is FEMA is technically not supposed to manage disaster responses. I know the media acts like they are, but they're just one group of folks sitting at a table in an emergency operations center with a colored vest that identifies, are you federal, are you financial, are you local, whatever you may be. The other thing is the agency cannot offer more money or resources to states and people in those states that have been affected than they're allowed to. Now, that's separate from what other federal agencies should or should have been doing, or people in Washington, D.C. should have been doing. And the other thing is that's separate from the stories that are out there about the degree to which FEMA has been involved in supporting or aiding foreign nationals coming across our borders. If Congress or other federal agencies say, FEMA, you can do this, or more accurately, we're ordering you to do this, then that's what they've got to do. So yes, they may be spending more money on people coming across the border than people who already live here, but that's because somebody gave them the order to do it. It's I wouldn't say joke, but it's the age-old trope out of novels and movies when you've got somebody asking a person on the witness stand or during a debrief and saying, who gave the order? This is one of those situations where it's like, well, who gave the order? I also saw the DEI videos, the diversity equity videos that were trotted out on Twitter about what's going on inside of FEMA. Frankly, I saw those every week with other federal agencies with whom I've worked. That's nothing new. It isn't to say, oh, look, and I'm not trying to defend FEMA. I'm just dealing with facts here, folks. There's not an agency on the planet right now that doesn't have those videos coming out. I've got friends of mine who work for private sector corporations who have, what do you call it, copied me on documentation, or have sent me text messages saying, I was hoping to get a lot done this week, but unfortunately we have to attend our corporate mandatory DEI videos about how I'm a bad person. So we got to get the emotion out of this and deal with facts. when we're dealing with federal agencies, especially after the 1-2 punch we've had between these two hurricanes. Now, I am aware of people trying to help and being blocked, especially in the case of North Carolina, especially the topic of people using their own helicopters to deliver aid. I appreciate that. At the same time, during a disaster response, and remember, I currently work with emergency managers at several major universities who in turn work with the states and work with the feds. You have to have a centralized authority. You can't have folks operating outside the chain of command. It helps avoid confusion. It prevents the need to rescue more people because now folks who tried to help need to be rescued as well. Now, where, in my opinion, is the central problem with what we're dealing with right now? To me, the central problem is communication and a lack of effective public communication and direction by National Guard in several states, FEMA to a degree, and state agencies and all concerned. FEMA and others should have had their agency leadership front and center with the media and what's known as either a Joint Information Center or a JIC, as it's called, a JIC, for North Carolina in particular, or what's known as a Public Information Officer or a PIO. I saw this last spring with various universities' responses to the protest activity that occurred there, where public information was non-existent. So in that situation, said more bluntly, large universities' communications were a total vacuum of information. And that's what appears to be the case with these disasters. The lack of statements by various federal agencies, including FEMA, is completely dumbfounding to me. Not just North Carolina, but Georgia, Tennessee, who's often forgotten about, that did take a hell of a hit. They lost some dams, and Florida, among others. Although Florida's done better than most, as of course they would. They have a very mature set of resources in place. So instead, in these situations, what tends to happen, whether it's protest activity, natural disasters, what have you, the commentary in social media takes on a life of its own. To quote from one of my favorite science fiction shows, without me naming the show, I have to kill it before it develops language skills. Am I saying everything was managed by the book in the disaster response in North Carolina, among other states? No, absolutely not. At the same time, it's not the first major storm who caused unexpected levels of damage. If repairs will take a long time, the vacuum in public communications and direction is probably one of the biggest issues at play here. Plus, anytime you tell Americans they have to wait more than 48 hours for something, they tend to get agitated. The net of the situation in North Carolina is I have absolutely no idea who's in charge. Is it the National Guard? Is it FEMA? And as I said a moment ago, it's not supposed to be FEMA. Is it the state disaster body or whomever else? The net of this is, who is running the Emergency Operations Center in North Carolina and who's managing the response, and where the hell is their public information officer? Because they should have been on the air daily about 3 weeks ago. Florida, on the other hand, has this down to a science, and there's a number of reasons why. It's not just because they're a peninsula and they get hit a lot by bad weather. Now, the other thing is North Carolina itself. When I was reviewing comments from engineers, people in emergency response world, and in my own brain, several things came to mind, and one of which is the following. Now, I'm going to return to North Carolina, but let me make a point about something. Every time California has a drought, someone brings up the fact the state has excellent plans on the books for aquifers and better sources of water since literally the 1940s. Yet every time someone says, we ought to build those, the subject of the cost comes up and the projects get canceled. When I was working with Apple in San Jose back in 2014, the same thing happened. Gee, we're short of water. We should really build those aquifers. Oh, and by the way, those plans are still current and they're still germane today. It's not like we got to go redo them. Then the rains came and everybody forgot about it. So when it comes to North Carolina, the state of North Carolina has known at the state government level they have a major risk when it comes to heavy rainfall. If the rainfall's higher than a certain level, it would overwhelm their storm drain systems and water management resources. Now, this is not to blame the victim, but North Carolina's government, and by that, folks, I mean both political parties, they've known that risk was there for years. Now, will they build up those systems concerning the events after Hurricane Helene? I certainly hope so. The second item on this related topic about misinformation or a lack of information concerns the contracts with the unions managing the ports in the United States. The media has stopped covering the topic because a temporary solution was found. They also don't want people thinking about that right before an election. Now, here's the bombshell few people are discussing. The port unions are saying their position is there's zero room to negotiate on the idea of automation of U.S. ports. Now, if shipping is not your thing, let me oversimplify. Many of the world's largest ports are now heavily automated. And V has shown a number of pictures and things of ports in China and the degree of how mature those assets are. At the same time, China is not lacking in people to perform work, and even China has automated those ports. When you're as old as I am, this is an old story. Because you see, back in the early 1980s, there was a massive showdown between automakers and unions over the topic of robots on the assembly line, which, said another way, is automation. What was the solution? The unions and management agreed some jobs would be performed by workers, and incrementally over time, other jobs would be shifted to robots and automation. Frankly, most of the jobs that were going to be automated were ones who could get you killed, so behind the scenes, the workers were okay with it. The net of it, though, was it would mean a reduction in total union members over time and a reduction of union funds. Despite those things, an agreement was reached with some nudging by the federal government. In current time, the position of the U.S. port unions is zero flexibility on the topic of automation. Now, am I saying the unions are to blame? No. What I am saying is this is directly attributable to the economic competitiveness of the United States. Even if you're a believer in small government, this is one of those moments where you must nod in the government's direction, and V's got on the screen right now how they do it in other countries. This is one of those moments, folks, where even for folks like me who believe in limited government, this is a moment where we get to nod in the government's direction and say, okay, you're up. I say that because you need the authority of the central government to step in and move these negotiations to something that works for everybody. Expecting these two sides to work out something this critical will result in months of nothing. And of course, it will result in months of nothing for whoever becomes president after November. You'll see the topic surface again around January after the election, because that's when the current solution runs out of time. Equally, I laughed like a little kid upon seeing my local grocery stores run out of toilet paper again when people panicked over the port strike. So what have we learned? Stock up on toilet paper before January, obviously. Given the examples of post-hurricane responses and the port strike, among a multitude of other things, now more than ever, we have to look out for ourselves, our communities, and our families independently. If certain assets are available, that's great. If certain state or even federal assets are available during a crisis, that's fantastic. But you have to plan as though they're not there. That always has to be your starting point. That said, hang in there, network with others, continue to search the internet to find like-minded people or web pages or similar. And as I often say, build up the appropriate keyword, appropriate resources for yourself. On a related note, this concerns HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. No, HAARP did not direct or cause the hurricanes. That is the elites acting like they're in control of everything again, which they're not. And as I said on a prior show, when it came to the topic of, oh, HAARP is causing all the aurora borealis. No, they're running with that one for two reasons. One, to try and put forward the idea or the argument, we, your global elites, are in charge, which they are in some things, they're not when it comes to many others. But that unfortunately, the reality is 1,000 times worse. No, they didn't cause the hurricanes, but the sun did. Our planet has been hit by multiple solar flares, and the Midwest, in fact, tonight on Thursday, is supposed to have aurora that we can see with the naked eye. That much energy slamming into this planet is going to cause planetary problems, my friends. And the other thing is that if you talk to the right people or read the data, what do hurricanes actually do? What they're the Earth's actually defense mechanism, really. Now, I know it causes a ton of destruction for anything in the path of a hurricane, but whether it's a hurricane in the Atlantic or a typhoon in the Pacific, these are natural planetary phenomenon. And what they do is when the Earth accumulates too much energy, the Earth has to get rid of that energy somehow. Sometimes it's through volcanism or volcanoes, and the other mechanism is through these types of storms, through hurricanes and typhoons. They are literally directing energy up and out and away from the Earth. Now, we're in the way, unfortunately, because we're living in places where these storms will tend to travel. But The alternative, if we didn't have hurricanes, would be far worse. So we need hurricanes. And as the old joke goes, to quote Sam Kinison, you see that? That's sand. You know what that's going to be in 1,000 years? Sand. So you might want to move. So it's like, hey, if you want palm trees and beach, there's a price you got to pay. And I've got friends of mine who live in Florida where we have a constant back and forth about every winter, and we're digging out here in the Midwest. They're like, hey, I'm looking out my window and I get to see the ocean. And it's like, yeah, and this summer when I'm mowing the lawn, you're going to have insects the size of a small child. We all choose the problems we have. Hypocrisy, ain't it grand? Veles is not a sports person, and I'll be the first to admit that. People who know me personally know that about me. In fact, they often joke with me about it. Even when it comes to international soccer and rugby, which I am fans of those sports, I enjoy the matches, but I do admit I have limitations on what I understand about the rules. I understand the rules of soccer a little better than rugby. And even for me, there are limits to what I can fit in this head of mine. That said, let's talk about Pete Rose for a minute. I grew up in an area with a lot of Cincinnati Reds fans in baseball, and I didn't understand much about the sport. I understood the basics. I knew Rose was good and was an all-time hit leader, and all the kids on the bus who followed baseball thought he was awesome. And years passed, and then a scandal occurred in 1989. And at that time, Pete Rose was managing the Reds. It was discovered he was betting on the team. Then began years of people pushing back on his 1989 ban by Major League Baseball. Now, because I'm Veles, I'm going to say what many of you suspect. Yes, I actually met Pete Rose once briefly in a hotel lobby in Cincinnati. I was there as a guest of friends of Tony Perez, also of Reds fame. And Tony was speaking with Pete Rose and introduced me. And I would describe Pete Rose as gruff, but a decent guy. He was like the uncle you liked, but you knew you never wanted to piss him off. Pete Rose died recently, and a lot of controversy about his lifetime ban by Major League Baseball bubbled to the surface again. And I know some of you might be asking, okay, Veles, why are you even bringing up sports? This isn't your thing. Here's my beef. The corruption in college and major sports leagues is beyond what many of you can rationalize. And I'm dead serious. Aliens on the White House lawn is easier for many of us to internalize than the truth of how totally corrupt and manipulated professional sports has become. And I'll say it. There are games out there that are being thrown by design, folks, and that's no joke, and I would fight anybody on arguing that that's the case, because there's a lot of money to be made if certain games turn out a certain way. The athletes keep their mouths shut with good reason, and it's not just the non-disclosure agreements. Never mind the weirdness about how the score in last year's Super Bowl. Not to mention we have sports betting organizations who are now completely legal. Even more than that, we have sports betting organizations who literally sponsor various teams depending on the sport. But yes, we have to look out for the integrity of the game when it comes to the immovability of the Pete Rose matter with Major League Baseball. Pete Rose is like another Ohio favorite of mine, Jim Traficant, who many of you have heard me say a lot about Jim. They both were complicated and a little rough around the edges. But by the grace of God, they were real. Pete Rose didn't have his team throw games to guarantee he won his bets. You had to wait a few decades for that to occur right in front of your eyes when powerful interests seized professional sports, which they have. Pete Rose was a hometown guy betting on his hometown team. Rose was a man who once said he loved the game of baseball so much he'd run through hell in gasoline-soaked clothes just to play. Now, was this a you know better than to do that, Pete kind of thing regarding the betting? Sure. But the guy wasn't Bernie Madoff. And they could have just given him a fine and told him to step down from managing the Reds instead of what happened. For the sake of whatever is still decent in this world, could we just let the man rest and drop the ban? Also, speaking of Florida, and not to raise any inflammatory language, but the truth is the truth. Unlike a lack of prosecution of criminals in places like New York or California, Governor DeSantis in Florida has said, looters will get shot, period. I've seen some folks' homes where the wood covering windows has been spray painted to say, our guns are dry, dry, dry. I recall my relatives commenting during problems in Philadelphia in the early 1980s about, and I quote, in my day, we shot looters and that was it, unquote. Property is property, folks, and stealing property in some states does not have a bag limit or a specific hunting season. Texas has what they call a chicken law, where if you're walking off somebody's property with one of their chickens, That's cause enough to open fire. Always review your state's laws on the legality of deadly force, and I'm not taking that topic lightly. Khazarian history. For those of you who are fans of all things Khazaria, please check out Matthew Ehret's Canadian press piece, who came out recently on that topic, among others. You can find it on YouTube and BitChute on the Canadian Patriot Press page. The title of the specific program is Matt Ehret in Calgary, Part 1, Khazaria's Destruction and the Rise of the Templars. In true Matthew fashion, he goes back to around the time of the fall of Rome and moves forward in time about the true origins of Khazaria. It's an excellent program and had a lot of details I've never heard before. Also, given Matt's commentary on his program on Rogue last Tuesday, he has a lot of new material on that topic, as well as one of our favorites, which is the topic of UFOs and aliens. I posted one of those programs on Discord this morning. The Khazaria program that he produced also includes deep coverage into the history of various orders of knights who became London Corporation entities in later years. It's definitely worth checking out. Hunter Biden. Tom Luongo had a fascinating thought about Hunter Biden recently. You may recall a fair amount of chatter a while back about statements to the effect, and I quote, "It doesn't matter if they find Hunter guilty, the president will just pardon him," unquote. Anyone notice that Hunter in his sentencing keeps getting pushed back and back and back over time? The election is next month, folks. If they don't sentence Hunter Biden soon, Joe will not be able to pardon him. This is one of the many ways they keep pressure on Joe to do what they want. Equally just an example of how pervasive all the layers of blackmail are among the powerful. That sounds like Under the Silver Lake. Some of you may have seen or be aware of a movie who came out recently called Blink Twice. I've not seen it, but I plan to when I have a moment. My reason for raising...
The missus and I saw it. Great movie.
I've heard that from many.
Yeah, definitely watch it. It gives away a lot. Don't worry about the ending. Just watch the movie. Like 99% of it, it's very it's very for today and what we discuss and talk about.
Absolutely. And I'll admit I read the Wikipedia write-up of the story. My point of raising it today, folks, is several things, and noting V's comments a moment ago. The film was released right before the P. Diddy mess was all over the news, and there are similarities to what occurred with P. Diddy at his white parties and the narrative in the film. I find the timing and the correlations too similar to just be coincidence. Also, the heavy coverage in that film of various means used to make people forget their experiences is straight up MK Ultra. On a future program, I'll be covering new data who shows beyond the more direct methods of fatigue and conditioning to control a person, there are other equally effective methods. These include microwaves and low-frequency sound to condition a person into certain behaviors, or as I said a moment ago, make them forget. Can someone turn on the light? It's getting dark in here. Speaking of blackmail and P. Diddy, some additional insights for you. When that news conference was held a while back with the slick attorney from Busby Law in alignment with another law firm named AVA Law Group, you should instinctively know something was up. Both of those law firms are personal injury firms, so your first takeaway is the attorneys involved are not some name brand law firm going after Diddy. When it comes to the AVA law firm, their practice areas are not just practice areas for a firm like this with personal injury or medical malpractice listed on their website as areas of law they practice. No, they list their practice areas as specific cases. These include lawsuits against Ozempic, weed killer cases, New York State abuse law cases, and similar. Said another way, their legal expertise is by whatever high-profile ambulance they can chase. When you dig into how those firms manage the situation with P. Diddy, it's easy to see what the real story is. Further, also, it helps explain why powerful groups who don't want anything about that case to be public are letting it go on. They pulled together a bunch of people who claimed they were abused at Diddy's parties and then made deals. These law firms sought out high-profile, wealthy people and celebrities who were involved and have sought payment to keep things quiet. Said another way, this is a shakedown, folks, a classic extortion scheme. Whether or not they bring legal action against P. Diddy, they need to get in line on that one because the feds and others claim they want him first. Therefore, in my opinion, these claims against Diddy are just to justify this more lucrative venture. create legal celebrity for themselves, draw out a bunch of people to acquire quick payouts and non-disclosure agreements with other Hollywood personalities, music and business celebrities. I'm sure these law firms will make millions in fees off these cases. In the end, are the victims helped other than a check? No. Do we learn more about what's going on? No. I'm also firmly of the belief the FBI and others involved, either directly or indirectly, in these shakedown settlements with other high-profile people connected to Diddy, simply because it enables further blackmail that those federal agencies now have on other people. Are you getting headaches? Saw a video recently by a woman demonstrating where to find on your cell phone the text of the user agreement. This, of course, reminded me of the South Park episode where Silicon Valley executives wanted to see if people would take the time to read the user agreement. That South Park episode focused heavily on Apple, of course. The point of the episode was if you signed the user agreement, then the company had the legal right to surgically connect you to another person like a human centipede. It's yet another South Park episode with a lot of subtlety to it and is loaded with some various serious things to consider. Not the least of which is the theme I've covered on Rogue several times. That being the world's elites love to experiment on humanity like their own personal petri dish. The folks who are really into that are Silicon Valley and at an academic level, schools like Stanford. I'll tell you, I know factually the reason why Silicon Valley is ground zero of this is because the U.S. intelligence community is so heavily involved there. The woman's point about reading the user agreement was if you open your cell phone and go to your settings section, you scroll all the way to the bottom. And of course you scroll all the way to the bottom because much like page 2 or 3 of a Google search, no one ever goes there. You may find it under the legal section, or you may find it under a section called Safety and Regulatory Manual, depending on your brand of phone. The net of it is if you open that section and scroll way to the bottom, guess what you find? You'll find technical data telling you how much energy your phone is giving off and how far away from your body it has to be without causing harm. They put it in writing. So let me say that again. If you read the user's data for your phone, it will tell you how many inches or feet from your body the unit has to be before it ceases to be dangerous. There are people who believe if future lawsuits come against the manufacturers or the carriers, they'll get thrown out of court because you were warned about the potential brain cancer. Personally, I always use the speaker on my cell phone as I rarely put it to my ear. And also, I never, absolutely never use Bluetooth earbuds. Now, the next couple of items I've got for us focus on electricity infrastructure in the U.S. and AI, who I've also been covering quite a bit of late. AI data centers. Sam Altman has been busy in the artificial intelligence data center space. While meeting with the Biden administration, he outlined the needs for AI data centers, including new infrastructure builds. For those of you who recall my lesson on megawatts versus gigawatts, just a reminder, 1 megawatt is enough power for about 200 homes, and 1 gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts and is enough to power a city. Sam has proposed the government should financially subsidize, with your tax dollars of course, multiple 5 gigawatt data centers capable of supporting AI operations. You'll recall on my last show, I was talking about just one data center being built at 1 gigawatt. The selling point being used for this are the usuals: to enable the United States to stay competitive against China, protect national security, and such a build-out will create thousands of jobs. By the way, let's just say I'm familiar with a resource of the National Security Agency. Our national security from major actors is just fine, folks. That's complete bunk to say that we got to do this to protect the United States. They left the door open on what would power those data centers to the tune of 5 gigawatts, but I know you all know the answer, as does Kemmerer, Wyoming. Nuclear power and microreactors and Bill Gates. Mike Moore of True Pundit had a caller on his program who relayed that Bill Gates has another nuclear power plant operating with liquid salt technology, just like the one up in Wyoming. The gentleman said, ironically, it was near Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He relayed friends of his working at the plant told him it will never need Nuclear Regulatory Agency approval to go into operation. Several takeaways if that's true. First, we discussed recently the backlog of nuclear power plant inspections. Secondly, the massive efforts out there across the United States with several small nuclear power plant technologies that are being developed. Bill Gates' approach with salt as a coolant is just one of those approaches. Thirdly, there's a belief Gates has paid off the right people to avoid his R&D facilities requiring NRC inspections, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The question is that short term, by that I mean getting the plant up and operating for R&D operations, or does that mean long term once the technology starts getting used across the country? Plus, I don't know about you, but I have a slight concern if we've got a long-term plant that starts operating and it was never inspected. ESG Strikes Back. ESG, who is shorthand for environment, social, and governance, who like DEI has been pushed out of the way by many organizations, is fighting back. ESG is a rating or standard many corporations tried to follow to improve the degree to which major investment firms invested money in them. A recent article said moves by corporations to claim they're stepping away from their ESG goals may be an attempt to slip out of the public's attention. Said more bluntly, they're acting as though they're moving away from ESG standards, but in fact will return to them later. Remember, the globalists may retreat, folks, but they don't give up. This is a war, not a battle, folks. The way to provide protection from angry shareholders who want them to abandon ESG standards is being offered by the SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission last March quietly added climate disclosure rules who require every large U.S. corporation to provide detailed reports on climate-related physical and transition risks faced by their business. This also includes their carbon impacts. In practice, this means major corporations must now guess at all the potential impacts to their companies from possible environmental impacts plus the impact on carbon. They can now claim it's not their fault the SEC is making them do it. This will put a lot of pressure on traditional industries in the U.S., including manufacturing. It will also impact the traditional energy industry, too. However, there is an industry sector who would probably benefit from those rules, that being nuclear, and especially our friends in the micro-reactor sector. A classic Hegelian move, folks. We have to save the environment, so we've got to move off coal and related power sources towards wind and solar. Wind and solar come up short, in particular, in regard to AI's massive power consumption needs for data centers. Who rides into the rescue? Micronuclear reactors and new technology from folks like Gates. It's not like you have a choice. All the coal-fired and related power plants are shut down or on a restricted operation. Micronuclear power development. Westinghouse, a major conglomerate firm from the days when GE was a real company, or was still a real company, is back in the news. Westinghouse, like GE, were always big players in the power generation market. Rising like a vampire on a dark night, Westinghouse is moving back into the nuclear power world with great enthusiasm. They've received approval from the Department of Energy to have their new 5-megawatt micronuclear reactor up and operating in the next 2 years. Wait, that was 5 gigawatts. 5 gigawatts, that seems to rhyme with artificial intelligence data centers for some reason. Anyway, the reactor type is named an eVinci, lowercase e, capital V-I-N-C-I, and only needs 2 acres of land to operate. That's rather mind-blowing, folks, if you consider the footprint of a traditional nuclear reactor. Westinghouse's reactor can operate for 5 years before it needs refueling. This reactor was part of several designs being developed at the National Reactor Innovation Center, or NRIC, in Idaho. Also, an amusing tidbit about the Department of Energy's program with NRIC. It was authorized under Donald Trump in 2008 as part of the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act. As I rarely believe in coincidences, anyone want to place a dollar bet if he becomes president again, and during his presidency we announce a whole new era of nuclear power capability? I can hear the Donald's press conference now. They said it couldn't be done, but we did it. We did it in Idaho, a beautiful state. You should see it, Idaho. A lot of guys said no one could build a reactor like this. These are beautiful reactors. You should see these reactors. They're made in America, the greatest country. I need Shane Gillis, the comedian, to do a proper Trump imitation. Firearm maintenance. Just an awareness, I didn't know this until recently. For all you rifle owners who are considering using a Cerakote coating on your firearm, you may want to reconsider. That coating appears very bright under infrared and similar light. I'm not just speaking in terms of someone seeing you with a night scope, folks. If you're working in the field during the early morning or early evening hunting deer or similar prey, they can see your rifle. This is why you never wash your hunting camo in regular detergents, because they have brighteners in them. You use the special detergents they sell at Cabela's and similar for your hunting clothes. Just an awareness. V, your old haunting grounds, the New York subway. From the publication The Intercept, we have news out of New York City and specifically the subways. To clamp down on crime, they've increased the police presence in the subway system. In late September, an officer, while confronting someone who was evading paying a fare, opened fire, hit the suspect, hit a bystander, and shot another police officer by accident. The New York Police Department data shows in 20 right the NYPD data shows in 2023 alone, the department recorded more stops of people in the city in that year than in the prior 10 years. Overtime for officers has also skyrocketed. Alternative archaeology and triggering. Graham Hancock, ever the lightning rod in alternative history space, has added to the size of that lightning rod. Graham has secured a second season on Netflix of his Ancient Apocalypse series. It will air October 16th of this year with 6 episodes at 40 minutes each. I'm going to be on the road, so I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm probably going to have to plug my laptop into my hotel TV. I shared with you previously how much season 1 sent various university history department professors and other guardians of the public good into overdrive. Now Graham has a second season coming. Remember the old rule, folks, about a crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste, and the free marketing this will give Netflix will be immense. But wait, there's more. None other than Keanu Reeves is going to be involved in some of the episodes, and this has only made the guardians of the official narrative of everything become stroke candidates. Can you imagine how many people will now be added to the viewership of that program because Keanu's involved? Of course he was compensated to be involved, but the merger of those two personalities on the second installment of the series will not only mean a cup of coffee as I glue myself to the TV when it airs. It means I'm laughing like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons at the sheer hate of academics and others at Keanu's involvement in the series. V, be sure to let your missus know about this one. Oh, yes. Alternative archaeology and interaction legends. While reviewing some recent archaeological data, a thought came to mind for me. The Hopi and other southwestern U.S. native peoples often have legends of gods or deities interacting with them while wearing what one would call essentially space suits like astronauts. Certainly Eric von Daniken went in that direction in the 1970s. The thought came to mind, what if someone from our era or time went back in time? Let's say to save someone's life who was critical to history or something else. No matter how many inoculations we have, we will be safe, but not the people with whom we interact. We would be carriers of disease even if we're inoculated. No better example than the early explorers who came to the Americas, and then within 5 years, the populations of those peoples may have been cut down by 50% or more. So how to solve the problem? Well, hypothetically, we would have to wear biosuits or similar to make sure we didn't pass our diseases on to those people. So then, therefore, for those of us that are fans of the idea about post-catastrophe situations after the last ice age, and assuming certain theories about that are true, interactions by more advanced groups prior to that disaster and who survived, who are trying to help less advanced groups on the Earth during the recovery, would require some kind of bodysuit, assuming that their medical care is superior, just to make sure that they don't pass their diseases on to the more tribal peoples populating the Earth at that time. Just a thought on all those cave paintings and Kachina dolls of the gods. Turkey resumes its role. An analyst had some input on Turkey. The Intel Drop website ran a story recently about predictions from Scott Ritter regarding the power vacuum who would develop if NATO is further weakened after its foray into Ukraine. He projects NATO will cease to be an effective organization in 10 or less years. Several factors also contribute to changing foreign policy by Turkey, such as increasing weapons purchases from Russia, not to mention a recent attempted coup in the country, who some believe was orchestrated by the West. Equally typical of the rumor mill in the Middle East, in fairness, it must be pointed out there are people inside and outside of Turkey who believe that coup was orchestrated by Erdogan himself to win sympathy and justify his tightening of the country. Lastly is the long history of Europe always keeping Turkey at arm's length, and that reality goes back nearly 100 years. The article describes Turkey pursuing a multi-vector strategy with many countries and organizations. It's no small irony, though, to also point out in such a weakened NATO environment, it would mean Turkey's influence in the Balkans, much like the Ottoman Empire before them, will be considerable. A fact I'm sure will cause heartburn with Greece, but that would also require Greece to get their act together and do something about it. Something Veles just can't see happening short of a dictatorship taking over Greece first to oppose Turkish moves in the region. We will see. Droning. I have to remind us all that George Friedman's books, for about 20 years, he was projecting a lot of detail about what we're now seeing when it comes to drones, both in commercial use and in military applications. I would add far more bluntly that Neil Stephenson did in a few of his cyberpunk-themed books as well. We also have to remember Friedman, like Tom Clancy, is someone who's been fed intelligence data for years. I remember the stir Friedman's first intelligence group, Stratfor, caused when it came out. Though I have since come to understand a wider view about the world, and particularly apex elites, Friedman's initial work was excellent. If you're operating from a worldview who loosely ties in with the accepted view of history, he could still take you down fascinating roads in lesser-known history. He and his people could brilliantly summarize major world events on a level few could. He also got in a whole barrel of trouble when, according to sources I knew in Washington, D.C., told me the following. Evidently, during classified congressional meetings with the U.S. intelligence community, things went sideways. Several Congress people during those closed hearings eventually challenged intelligence leaders why the United States government was giving them billions of dollars for shaky analysis when for a bit more than $100 a year, Stratfor could provide better information. Well, holy crap, you could hear the thunder in Satan's living room halfway around the world when that went down. As a result, Stratfor was hacked, their sources were exposed, and it got ugly. Why does any of this matter on the topic of drones? It matters because Friedman and his crew were accomplishing two things. They were very sharp and astute people about the international environment, like Robert Young Pelton, just without the dry sense of humor about how international armed gangs get their weapons. So first, they were very sharp people, but if you gave them the right breadcrumbs or down the right intelligence road, they could do wonders with that data. As the old saying goes in Washington, D.C., or any major capital city, information is the only thing with any real value. Even money to a degree doesn't matter when it comes to information, when it comes to geopolitics. It's not that some angry intelligence agencies didn't know the things Friedman knew. It's just that they didn't want to share it with Congress. I mean, heck, they would probably just go buy stock based on what they were told. But Congress could never appreciate the true value of real intelligence information. Friedman could, and that's why when it came to his many years of projections about where drone technology would go, I knew he was right. I also knew he was right because I was working in places where I saw mock-ups of drone technology and resources for those drones years before it was ever publicly known. It's why I felt Friedman's projections about the technology who was already being developed would probably prove true. Yes, many of us at Rogue have challenges with Friedman, but not when it came to his projections about drone technology. Lastly, a term for clarity, as you'll be hearing more of it now, is the term FPV, or Foxtrot Papa Victor. This means a forward person view drone, or if you will, a drone for one. These are drones used in commercial applications, much less military ones, where there's a pilot of the drone, but a variety of observers are viewing the data and asking the pilot to fly it or hover it over certain directions. This instead is a reference to a drone who's operated just by a single person. And we've seen a lot of this in, and not to speak of it dispassionately, but in the Ukraine conflict by both sides. Memory hole. We haven't had a memory hole in a very long time, so I thought I'd revisit today with some new items. In 2024, among several things, we had all the Boeing whistleblowers who died from suicide. In the summer of 2024, we had the death of the Israeli private equity lead in Silicon Valley, Liran Petrushka, and the various things he was involved in before his private plane crashed. Then we have the Maui fires in 2024 and the fires in Canada in the spring of 2023. If you remember the latter, that's when the skies above New York City, among other places, looked like Mordor. You forgot about that already, didn't you? We had two of the largest bank collapses in history in 2023, being Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, both located in Silicon Valley. Anyone remember the thing earlier in 2022 with the fake DHS and Secret Service guys operating in Washington? It was a big dust-up at the time about how these guys were operating all over Washington, D.C. with a ton of fake credentials, and then poof, nothing. What the heck happened to Seth Rich, and importantly, why? Jean-Luc Brunel is dead. Just a reminder of the troika of Jeff Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel, and Peter Nygard. 2 out of 3 of those folks are dead. Nygard is sitting in a hole somewhere, and God only knows what's going on with him. Why will the FBI not properly investigate the Las Vegas shootings from several years ago? Shared with you on a prior program when I was in Las Vegas and drove around the site of the shooting. It blew my mind that the unexplained helicopters were all sourced from one small airport in Las Vegas, who's literally across the street from the Welcome to Las Vegas sign everyone uses to take their photos. Let's not forget Gary Webb. He was the San Jose Mercury News reporter who exposed the connections between U.S. intelligence, drug traffic in the U.S., and off-the-books intel activity. He was profiled in the movie Kill the Messenger. As explained by the Zeller brothers, Gary was not killed as many believe, and it was in fact suicide. However, given what was done to him to drive him to that point, it might have been more humane if in fact somebody had killed him. Why are so many documents still classified from World War I, especially diplomatic and banking communications among Imperial Russia, France, Britain, Imperial Germany, and the United States to this day? Never forget the Barrington Resolution. It was when those hundreds of international doctors questioned the COOF approaches in the vaccines. They paid a terrible price for telling the truth and shouldn't be forgotten. I wonder if we will ever find out what happened to Ray Grykar, the local prosecutor in Pennsylvania who wanted to file charges against Jerry Sandusky at the University of Pennsylvania as far back as 1998. Eventually, Grykar dropped his investigation and he disappeared a few years ago after leaving his house to do some errands. They found his car, and inside his car was a cell phone, but no wallet or keys. Then a while later, his laptop turned up in a river, but was missing its hard drive. Then the hard drive was found a little while later on a riverbank, but was too damaged to find any data. He's never been heard from since, nor has his body turned up. Who did Bill Barr's dad hire? Oh yes, Jeff Epstein for the first major job at a private girls' school in Manhattan. What was one of the bigger areas in U.S. history where Bill Barr showed up? Cleaning up Iran-Contra. Speaking of Iran-Contra, who paid for Oliver North's lawyers during Iran-Contra? The Clintons did. Why would they do that? Well, who was Bill Clinton's handler in the CIA when drugs were coming into Arkansas from South America and guns were going down into South America? Well, his handler was Oliver North, who for many years used the code name John Cathy. A lot of people died in New York nursing homes during the coup, among other U.S. states, due to flat-out criminal behavior by putting sick people in tight spaces. Of course, we had heard on prior road programs about how in parts of Western Scotland and Australia, that is the policy of the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, this being to hasten people's demise to reduce the healthcare costs to the NHS. What happened to all the stolen evidence in the police storage site in Florida where they had all the Epstein evidence? We need to remember Erin Valente. I brought her up a week or two ago, of Tinker Ventures, which was her application design company, and she was previously the director of product development at Overstock. They found her dead in the backseat of a rental car in Silicon Valley after traveling to California. She was from Silicon Valley. She was in Silicon Valley, where she was traveling from her native Utah in October of 2019 for a tech conference. Before she disappeared on October 7th, family and friends started receiving unusual phone calls from her where she was speaking in rapid sentences. The autopsy? Natural causes with a possible contribution from a manic episode. She was 33 years old and in good health, folks. Comments she made to her parents included, and I quote, "Mind control is really neural control," and the famous one, "It's all a game. It's a thought experiment. The machines are in control. This is a form of matrix." Also, remember the Overstock company was the outfit where the former CEO Patrick Byrne said he'd been involved in political espionage. We still don't know what happened to Philip Haney, the DHS whistleblower. If you'll remember, he had a second book that was coming out where he was going to name names, unlike his first book, where he just gave the narrative about what was going on in government. Then in 2013, we have the reporter Michael Hastings, who died in LA of that year. He was the guy whose car exploded before the vehicle even hit anything, and there's film of it on YouTube. He'd been digging into WikiLeaks drops about government research into a wide variety of very crazy topics. What's the true backstory on the U.S. government use of the Promise software and the death of Danny Casolaro, among others? Plus the very excellent Netflix documentary that came out about Danny just this year. And what role did that topic have in the death of Gary DeVore, also known in certain circles as the writer with no hands? V, I yield the floor, sir.
Incredible stuff, man. I mean, you ran the gambit of a lot of topics, and as with every single one of the Veles broadcasts, folks, I recommend you go back, listen to it again, and take your notes and have your dark roast ready. One of the things, do you remember there was a gentleman, probably I'd say maybe a couple years back, right before Trump was about to run. This was the time when Hastings was killed, where his engine block like literally went like a quarter of a mile outside of his
Right.
car. And
Yes.
it's the most stupidest thing in the world. You know, it was insane. It was the guy. His name currently escapes me at the moment, but he was working on a documentary called The Gray State. Do you remember that?
I vaguely recall the gray state, not the name
Yeah.
of the guy.
And then all of a sudden there was a murder suicide. So all of a sudden this guy who was working on his project, happy go lucky kind of dude, very positive, well known in the community, former, Marine or something like that, a former military guy. He I think it was military intel, the thing that he did. So he was working on the gray state, and next you know, he one day he wakes up. He shoots his wife, his 5-year-old daughter, and he kills himself. And then, but the back door of his house was open, and what else? His after he killed himself, he decapitated or he dismembered his own arm from his body or something like that, and it was all ruled a suicide. You know, and
What's like
and it was all,
your favorite topic about people who shoot themselves 12 times with a nail gun?
yeah,
Well, and
exactly.
I've said on many shows, my friends, and I'm very serious when I say this. Each and every one of us, truly, we owe an unbelievable. It's like what one of my relatives told me when I was a little kid in the 70s, and they would go into depth about Imperial Russia and my relatives trying to get out alive, and how many
Yeah,
people didn't make it, and going across Russia's 9 time zones, sailing through icebergs from Vladivostok into Alaska, which at that time was still a territory, getting through Canada, not getting killed,
right.
making it into the United States. And what have they won? The Great Depression, followed by World War II, followed by Korea. And
Mm,
my relatives looking at me saying, it's not that you owe anybody per se, but you owe us the fact that you are the best you can be, because everybody else before you didn't make it. It's not about you've got to do good because I expect you to, or you owe me, or whatever. It's like, no, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to us to be the best you can possibly be. And so whether it is the documentary that V is talking about, or it's Danny Casolaro, or it's even the documentary there's so much I could stick in the memory hole. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with Frank at Quite Frankly,
mm.
and he asked me at one point and said, oh, and by the way, folks, we will have a Veles Rogue News piece in Frank's November magazine for Quite Frankly. So our
Nice.
relationship with Frank continues to move forward. But Frank asked me at one point, he goes, hey, man, sometime if you can, he goes, cut and paste your memory hole stuff and send it over to me. Because he on occasion does something like that. And he said, it's truly mind-blowing what we have forgotten. And this goes to Blink Twice. This goes to my brother from another mother, Cool Cat, on many a 3 a.m. conversation he and I have on Discord, along with many of you others that I've had this topic discussed. And in fact, I will be covering on my next program, which will not be next week, but the week after, which is the intentional effort to scrub the internet of things. It's like that scene from Batman in 1989 where Knox, the reporter, is asking the police department what happened to the guy who becomes the Joker, Jack Nicholson's character, and he was there and he saw him dropped by Batman into the vat of chemicals, and the cop on the other end of the phone goes, well, Napier committed suicide, and Knox's character screams into the phone, suicide, wait a minute, let me get let me get my tape recorder. Because it's like, I saw it with, and how many times, folks, have I said this on this show? You see stuff with your own eyes and they're looking at you going, that's not what you saw. But I'm holding evidence in my hands. No, you're not. Here, take this pill. Just breathe deeply and forget everything you think you know, because none of this shit happened. There are so many things I should actually go include in the memory hole to these people who have lost their lives, folks. And it goes to the Gary DeVore thing, and that's where I appreciated Frank having on the Zeller brothers, the two New Jersey state investigators. I love the Zellers. Plus, they've got that gruff kind of New Jersey tone in their voice. They always sound like two guys you're talking to in a pizza shop where all of you have your backs against the wall and are holding your hands up to your mouth so that nobody can hear what you're saying. But they had a personal relationship with Gary DeVore. And they said, it would have been better if somebody showed up at Gary's place and shot and killed him. But they're like, this is a guy that was so driven, so type A personality. He broke this major at the time and even now mind-blowing thing that it's like, yeah, we're selling narcotics to fund off the books intelligence operations, and we think all of you in the general public are scum. And their comment was, Gary had to move into his mom's place. He lost his wife and kid. No paper, no one in the media would pick him up. He was doing odd jobs and stuff, and they're like, that's why he killed himself. It's like they literally destroyed everything he cared about. And of course, the opportunity for all of us, and it's what I've been trying to do here on Rogue in now my 4 years with all of you and V, is Gary was one guy with one story. But,
right.
On the big giant whiteboard in front of all of us with the red string, it's, yeah, but Gary leads to Promise Software. And Promise Software leads to Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes leads to Venice. And Venice leads to the Vatican. And the Vatican leads to London Corporation. And as I'm running out of red string, and it's like, oh my God, professional wrestling is real. But all of these documentaries, and that's another thing I've raised too, folks, and I've given you some names. If you look at Frontline on PBS back in the 80s, my God, when I think of the VCR tapes I've got downstairs that I've got to somehow convert over to DVDs or similar, put it on some kind of media to save it. They did an excellent show on what they called the Triple Triangle in Washington, D.C. It was fantastic. They had the Iron Triangle, the Bamboo Triangle, and the Money Triangle. And they showed the revolving door. And this is like 1988. And they were showing the revolving door of defense contractor people going into government people going into finance people going into defense. And it's always the same people. And they covered all of this in detail back then. And it like the MK Ultra books that I've shared with all of you, that some of them were published in 74 and 75. Hell, I was a 5-year-old kid back then. But it's got data that we have ... blinked twice and we've forgotten about it. And we can't forget about it, because
right.
the truth is out there.
No, absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Great show, by the way, V, with Matthew.
No, it really was, man. It really was. Hey, did you hear something about Iran detonating a nuke?
I saw that.
What do you think? You think it's real?
Honestly,
if it's real, it's a game changer.
Yes. And I said this on another show. I'll do my damnedest to be brief. I think Iran has had half a kiloton or a kiloton capability for probably 10 years.
I agree with that.
That said, I attended a defense conference once where cold analytical people who will probably upset most of you, but it's like that's their job, is to just be, hey, you told me to solve the problem. That's what I'm doing. Their response when somebody said, well, what if Iran has nuclear weapons, was then we just use a neutron bomb. Because the point was, if you detonate a neutron bomb over the Iranian mountains, unless there's iron or similar in those mountains to reflect the EMP pulse, you can detonate those weapons inside those tunnels. But again, that's that's when you see people looking at what's going on between Iran and Israel, which a friend of mine I used to work with sent me a note the other day, and he goes, I don't know if you want to include this in your show, but he goes, the whole scene between Iran and Israel at this point is almost reminding me of the classic Star Wars 1960s episode where they land on the planet where the two planets are having a war, but it's entirely fought by computers. And they just make people go into incinerators if you were counted as a casualty. And there's a scene at the end where Captain Kirk is confronting the leader of one of those two worlds, and he's like, "You're fighting with computers." And they're like, "Well, yes, no civilization could withstand 500 years of war with the kind of weapons we have available. This way, both of our societies continue." And it's like, maybe you should stop. What's going on between Iran and Israel right now? The types of targets that should be hit are not being hit. Doesn't mean people aren't dying, but I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It does matter, but it's the game they play. But yeah. Does Iran have nukes? Did they run a test? Or, not to be indelicate, I mean, hell, it happened to the Russians. Did something fall off a shelf and detonate? Anything's possible. But yes, the seismic readings definitely give the indication that something went off. Now, that being said, the godlike technology we have in orbit should be able to determine whether or not that's actually what happened. But at our level here on this show, unless somebody meets me in a park and hands me a piece of paper, there's no way we'll ever get confirmation of that. But I would assure you, and that's why a test like that would be done, folks. That's why they would do a test like that, because the people who matter do have the satellites to say, hey, that shit was for real. They didn't just detonate a bunch of explosives underground. That was an actual nuke.
Right.
So
interesting. Good to know.
Plus, as the old joke goes, if you loved the level of restraint and containment that Pakistan showed in handing around nuclear technology, you haven't lived until you've seen what Iran will do. Every kid on the court, the Crips and the Bloods will have low yield nukes.
Oh man, that's funny. Oh man. Well, may we live in interesting times, because we certainly are.
We are, and for those of you who care to, if you're north of the Mason-Dixon line here in the continental United States, you should be able to look up in the sky and see aurora this evening, which I would like to point out, speaking of the memory hole, is completely unnatural and should not be happening. However, while the sun is playing its games with us, you should be able to look up this evening, depending on where you live and you're not in a major metropolitan area or you drive outside one. You should, looking north, you should be able to see probably a pink or red hue to the sky this evening. I mean, as the old saying goes, it may be the end of the world, but at least you've got a hell of a front row seat.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Well, with that being said, fellas, we're at the end of the show. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll be back tomorrow. Peace out, Cub Scouts. Cheers, everybody.